Welcome back to another episode of the Be the CEO of Your Life and Business podcast. So this week has a little bit of a backstory that I want to get to and talk about first. That's why I'm kicking it off. All week long, I have had just the craziest week. The Monday, I had the day with Olivia, and while I was able to get some work done, it just wasn't a very full and productive day. It's not a normal work day. And then I had a bunch of things going on Tuesday. Wednesday, I was out of the office with my husband. And then yesterday felt like an absolute circus of a day. And, I've been thinking this entire year, because we have been in this growing momentum for our business. I've been really mindful and very aware of just my mindset around challenges and struggles that we face. And this week in particular, there was something just kind of nudging at me all week of saying, like, if you can make it through a week that looks like this, you can make it through anything. Like, you really could. And I kept reminding myself of that instead of automatically spiraling to, just anxiety and being stressed and feeling like I'm pulled in 17 different directions and that I can't, gain any traction in any one area. And so on my way to work this morning, I was listening to a podcast. What else is new? And the topic of the podcast was about like anxiety and overwhelm. And I just feel like it's always a good topic for me to listen to, because I can be very susceptible to that downward spiral of like, thinking that things are so unmanageable.
Which podcast was it?
It was the Mel Robbins podcast. Okay. And she talks about anxiety and overwhelm. And she asks like a really poignant question of like, what if it all works out? And so I said, that kind of applies to what I've been going through with, realizing just how much I've been pulled in different directions. Olivia's schedule at night is just crazy, and it's literally killing us. We are just all over the place. I look at Laura and I'm like, I don't know how she can do it with 3 of these schedules. And so as I was driving here, I was thinking, and this thought kept on coming up to my brain. I was like, wait a second, but what if this is trying to teach me something? Like, instead of me automatically defaulting to, oh, everything is so hectic, this is so awful, this week has been awful, I can't wait for the weekend, I want this week to be over and behind me, I started to get really curious and say, like, what if this is happening for me? What if there is a lesson to be learned? What if there is something that I can take away from this? And when it came to thinking about this and applying this thought to our business, we've been in a phase right now where we feel like there's something bubbling under the surface. We both have felt that way, like something is happening, shifting, changing a bit in a good way. And it's really hard though, when you're in the moment, like these small,
and you don't know what's coming.
You don't know what's coming. Right. So like, there's this unknown right ahead of you, but you're in the moment right here and now. And so you have to realize that you have so much control in the here and now. And so I'm thinking all these thoughts on the way to the office. I'm like, there's got to be a connection somewhere. And then I walk into my office and I change my daily calendar. I have one of those tear away, like 1 quote a day calendars. And the quote is from Tracy Ellis Ross. And it says, I'm learning every day to allow the space between where I am and where I want to be inspire me and not terrify me. And I was like, whoa. Okay.
Here's our podcast for today.
Here's the podcast for today, because if I could sum up what my thoughts were so clearly and succinctly, it would be this quote. It's like, do you choose, be the CEO, choose, you're in control. Do you choose to be inspired by the unknown and like where you think you're going, where your vision is taking you, what your goals are? Or do you resign yourself to being terrified because you don't know what's happening next?
And it's so hard in the moment to be inspired by it, right?
Terrifying.
Right. Terrifying. It is, because sometimes you go through seasons where you're like, why is this happening? I don't understand. This is not where I thought things were going to go. How could this be happening for me? This isn't what I want.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different directions that your mind can spin that type of scenario into. And I have definitely gotten better at recognizing that it's all happening for a reason.
Yeah.
Like I told you this morning, I had 2 things come in earlier in the week that both fell apart within 24 hours. But then I had 2 days later, a longtime client email me and say, I got the green light to do more work with you. So it's like, you know, in the beginning of the week, I was like, all right, well, this work's not coming in. But then 2 days later, it kind of opened up a little more room for me to do the work that was coming in from this other client.
Right.
So, you know, you may not recognize in the moment that it's happening for a reason, but if you just shift your mindset around it, instead of being terrified by it, just say, okay, you know, obviously it's happening for a reason. And, you know, another thought I had around this topic is, you know, Amy and I went to lunch with somebody last Friday and had a conversation about where we were several years ago. And one thing I said was, looking back on it now, I don't regret the experience or the decisions I made around what occurred there, because it led me to where I am today.
Right.
It gave me the experience I needed over those years to develop the skills necessary to run my own practice.
Yep.
At the time when it was all falling apart, it was a complete nightmare, so stressful, like beyond, like we were literally sick over the whole thing. We were so stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, you know, I was like, well, you know, I don't understand why this is happening, but I have no choice but to move on. And looking back on it now, it all happened for a reason.
Yeah, it did. And so I think that the biggest takeaway I think from here is to just remind yourself that you are always ultimately in control of your mindset. And that is really the most powerful tool that you have in your toolkit to move from one day that could be really overwhelming, really anxiety provoking, to the next day that could be a really great day.
Mhm.
Like Laura's example of her week this week of, you know, perhaps losing out on 2 business opportunities, but then the door opened the following day to another more consistent long-term business opportunity. You just have to roll with that punch and not get so, you know, emotionally driven by that change and that like maybe sour moment, and just say, okay, like, let's see what happens next. And I always love the analogy, when you think about like 2 airplanes that take off from one airport and they're heading in the same direction, then one just starts to veer off course, just like a tiny little bit. They can end up in another state. Like if you're heading for Dallas, Texas from New York, and you are a couple degrees off, you're going to end up in Miami, and you're going to be worlds apart from where you thought that you were going. And for a business owner, I think that this ties back into the decisions that you make, and knowing that not every thing that happens to you, or lost business opportunity or new business opportunity, is the one thing that is going to change like the direction of your business. And so many times it's people sit there and say like, can't wait until that like one client walks in the door that's going to change my business, or that one thing is going to come in that's going to just, that one employee is going to change it all. And it really does not happen that way. It happens with the consistent small wins over a period of time, and realizing that just because one sour thing happens, like a loss of a business client or a loss of an employee happens, you don't know how that could open up to something else happening.
And it's so hard to wrap your head around this, because when you're going through it, it can feel like the world is ending.
Yeah.
Like
everybody's a bad thing.
If it's a bad thing,
yeah.
Everybody's out to get you. You don't understand why this is happening. The stress you're under is incredible. And you know, listen, we've been there, right?
Yeah.
So years ago, what kind of mindset did we have?
It was awful.
A nightmare.
Absolutely awful.
It was an absolute nightmare. And it, you know, the mindset that we've developed since then only came from doing a lot of hard work in the personal development space, right? And I've been out on my own now for almost 4 years. Can you believe that?
Crazy. No, I can't. That feels like a lifetime.
It feels like a lifetime, but 4 years ago, I didn't have the same mindset that I have now.
No,
at all.
Mm-mm.
I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
And you know, I can look back at the things that have happened and recognize that they were actually happening for me, even though it doesn't feel like that, you know, when you're actually going through it.
Yeah.
But you have to think about, or at least try to think about, okay, I'm in this awful situation. Things are not going as I would like them to go.
Mm-hmm.
What am I learning from this?
Yes.
And you may not even have an answer
No.
at that point in time, but to even get yourself to the point where you're asking yourself that question, I think that's even a step. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it makes me think even more about the conversation that we had with a colleague very recently. And how I think we both left that conversation feeling like, oh, I remember what that felt like. Like, I remember feeling that way, having the mindset of, perhaps things aren't going to change or they're not going to be the way that you expected them to be. Our expectations drive everything in our lives, whether something is good or bad. And so I remember leaving there like, my mindset has grown so much, but that used to be me.
Didn't you see us in her?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? And it was so strange to be like sitting across the table from a
where
perspective
we were
like
years
that.
Ago?
Yeah. That I was 3 years ago. Right.
Yep.
It was right around this time, 3 years ago. So it was really interesting to just kind of feel like I had removed myself and realizing how much the past 3 years have taught me and the experience that I've had and I've had to force myself to up level my mindset and to take on a different approach and see things differently. I think it has a lot to do with our environment. I think it has a lot to do with the people that you surround yourself with. If I knew that Laura was not as involved with or interested in personal growth, I think it would be harder for me to feel this measure of growth in our business and to be really, moving in the direction that we are, because I wouldn't feel like I had somebody walking lockstep with me. And I think that's for any, business relationship, your personal relationships. If you don't have somebody that's growing alongside you, it can feel like you're growing in two separate directions. So that also helps with me being inspired, because I always have somebody whose mindset is towards growth and towards the next step or the next thing, and not resolving or resigning yourself to just be so knee jerk in the moment and being like, oh, it's not working out. Oh, we failed. Okay. Close up shop. We're closing the doors. That's not the immediate reaction we have for anything.
And most of the time you don't know where the growth is taking you.
Right.
Right. So I always said,
scary.
That is very scary. And I always said to you, we are meant for something more. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that means, but that was always, when we were at our old firm, that was always what I said to you.
Yeah.
I don't know what this means, but I feel like we are just meant for something more. And even when I left, I had to up level myself immediately with the client that I got. And literally maybe 2 weeks after my last day. It was the craziest thing. And it was the type of client that I would never have had the opportunity to work with at our old firm.
No.
So I had to up level myself immediately. And it was so scary. And I knew that I was already growing once I stepped out that door, but I didn't know where it was taking me.
And for somebody that has struggled with the ideas of perfection and always knowing what your next move is going to be, and being very in control and perhaps a little OCD and type A about things, it's really hard to sit here and say this without having all of the work that we've had to do to get to this point with our mindset, because guys, it's this daily struggle. You're with your thoughts every single day, no matter who you're around. And so they can really make an impact as to the next steps that you take and the future that you have and the goals that you're working towards. And, just remembering that you do ultimately have that control over your mind. You do have the control to say okay, maybe today wasn't a good day, but maybe ask questions. Brendan Burchard is one of my favorite people in the personal growth space. And I think that's because he asks so many incredible questions about everything. I was listening to his Daily Fire and Growth Day, and he was talking about a topic of something about your childhood or something about the way that you were raised and how it shaped you. And he's like, why don't you journal about that today? Why don't you ask yourself that question and start to really reflect on it? And it made me really appreciate, asking continuous questions and how you can use that in your own life when you feel like there are moments of like, why is this happening to me? It's not a good question. Ask a better question. Be like, okay, what do I think might come of this? What are my expectations? And if you put yourself in a track where I think being inspired is more hopeful than being terrified, which is like you basically are stuck and there's no way out, I think you can find more hope, and it helps motivate you to keep pushing forward and see what's behind like the next door, the next step.
And give yourself a little grace, because this is not easy.
No,
It's not easy. And we have days where we revert back to, oh my God,
Yeah.
why is this is so annoying? Why is this happening? I don't want to
Yes.
deal with this. And the uncertainty is scary.
Yeah.
Because you don't know why something is happening, or, what the purpose of it is. And it can really be terrifying. But even if you, just change your mindset a tiny bit by starting with, like Amy said, like asking yourself better questions. It's not going to change anything in the moment, right? Like nothing's going to happen instantaneously. But, if you continue to ask yourself those questions, you will start to grow little by little. Does that make sense?
And you start to change the natural reaction that you have to things, like your neural pathways that you're creating every day by having the same thoughts and going through the same routines and the same, processes in your brain. If you start interrupting that, you really do start to break up those like trains of thought, those automatic thoughts and responses that you have to situations. And all it takes is just one thought that you consistently start to just hammer away and hack at to like really make some progress and move towards inspiration.
And when you look back on it, you're not going to see it when you're in the moment.
No,
right? You're not going to see it in the moment.
Like what we had last week with our experience. It was out. It was like out of body. Like I sat there like, what was that me? Like you sound really familiar right now, because I feel like I saw myself.
We were talking to the old version of ourselves.
Yes.
Basically, that's literally what it was.
I know.
And it's so interesting because I think not everybody has that opportunity, right? You can see it and think back on what happened, but when you actually have the opportunity to sit down with somebody who is where you were a time ago, and you have grown so much and moved on, and you look back at this person and you're like, wow, that's where I was. This is where I am now. And we have grown 1,000 times more than I could have ever imagined in that time period.
Totally.
It's just been totally unbelievable.
Yeah. I agree with you. I'm just kind of gobsmacked by that revelation, because we both realized that on this call that was exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
But
it was very interesting to see. But it also, shows you that change is possible.
Yeah.
Like you're not stuck where you are. It may not be easy. Change is never easy.
Right.
I hate change. Like Amy knows better than anybody how much I hate change. And for me to leave my prior situation, it had to have been a crisis situation that pushed me out the door, which it was. Otherwise I would have never left.
Yeah.
So even that scenario, the way that went down, that was the only way I was leaving that
And
place.
that took a really long time to even get to that threshold boiling point as well. And realizing, like, again, going back to these discussions we were having, it's like, it's bubbling somewhere. But when you take that into context and you say, okay, I was there and now I'm here, and I'd like to say that I'm in a better place all around by being here, you can say that quote I said at the very beginning of the podcast today is true, that it could inspire, it could let that space of the unknown inspire you to perhaps find, a new path. And
don't be hard on yourself for the decisions you've made to date. Right. Because you can't change them. And even looking back now, I think I said this to you, and I said this, when we were at lunch last week, I said, even the partnership that we were in prior to this, I don't regret it.
No,
because, had I not done it, I would have always wondered whether or not it would have worked out.
Yeah.
We did do it. We learned very quickly that it was not the right situation, and I moved on.
Yeah.
But I don't regret it at all. It taught me something. My years there, I got experience there. Like it was all it's easy to say now, 4 years later, because
Mhm.
I'm not still sitting in that situation. When you're in it, it's so hard. But we know it is so hard to
Yeah.
kind of like see the light and be inspired by it instead of being terrified by it. But it is possible. And I know that even more so now, looking back after that meeting we had last week.
And that was like a big moment too.
Oh,
Even if you forget about the big moments and you just talk about the little moments, like you can't seem to find your motivation. You feel really stuck in your circumstances. You feel like you can't make any progress anywhere, any meaningful progress anywhere. Start to get curious about it and really say to yourself, like, there's got to be a lesson here somewhere. There's got to be some, and let that inspire you to just keep moving forward, as opposed to taking every day as like, oh, how dreadful, right?
yeah, I love that. Just let the uncertainty and what you're thinking about, and the unknown and the situation, inspire you instead of terrify you. Because if you just start, not all the time, you're not a robot,
Yeah.
but just start to let it inspire you. And I promise you, it will lead towards change and growth. So we hope these tips were helpful. We thank you for spending time with us, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.